Thanks for everyone who has joined us today, and thanks for everyone who are tuning in and watching the video after it's produced after this presentation. Today, we're going to talk about a conversation that's near and dear to my heart. It's one called Leadership KATA. For those of you who have heard of Toyota KATA, you probably know that leadership plays a very special role in driving a culture of continuous improvement, a culture of coaching, and a culture of KATA throughout the organization. So I tapped a person that I respect greatly, Mr. Dr. William Harvey, who has some really impressive achievements in this space, and he studied and understood and developed his own kind of way of thinking about this and driving a culture in this space. And he's going to provide a brief conversation with us today. Those of you who have followed the series know that we are very passionate about building a culture of Kaizen throughout the organization. So this series is designed to get you to think and understand Kaizen in a way like you've never had before. And we're inviting thought leaders like Dr. William Harvey to help expand our way of thinking about continuous improvement. I'll be up. So quick agenda review today. We'll do introductions in just a moment. We'll do our main presentation. Again, Leadership KATA, Dr. William Harvey. Stick around to the end. We got some giveaways, so you don't want to miss out on that. And we got a brief outro as we prepare for next month's presentation. Little intro on myself. I'm Calvin Williams. I am the founder of a company called Improver. We have both a university where we offer Lean and Six Sigma and TPM certifications from the white belt all the way up to the master black belt level. We also offer a Kaizen or continuous improvement management software that helps you do projects, that helps you do Toyota KATA and so many other amazing things. I've got 20 years of experience in operations, continuous improvement, strategy execution, consulting, and some other fun stuff. Work for some really amazing companies, Nestle, Mars, Colgate, et cetera. And just over a year ago, and Dr. Harvey and I were just talking about this, but I became an author of a book called Fit, The Simple Science of Achieving Strategic Goals. If you like today's presentation, you'll also love the book and what it kind of dives into at a much deeper level as well. So again, make sure you stick around because we're gonna raffle off a prize or maybe more than one prize at the end of the presentation. So, all right, our featured guest, Dr. William Harvey. A couple of notes on him. Of course, I'm not going to do his introduction the justice it deserves, but let me give it a shot. He's currently a operations leader, plant manager at Mitchelman. He's the program chair at AME, the Association of Manufacturing Excellence. It's one of the largest lean and continuous improvement organizations in the U.S. He's also a PhD in educational leadership from Northern Kentucky University. And I don't know the exact title of his thesis, but I know it was very much related to Toyota KATA and the science of developing the human behavior pattern of thinking and acting in a way that enables a continuous improvement culture. So, so if you guys don't mind, let us give our full attention to Dr. Harvey as he takes us through his presentation. If you don't mind also submitting your questions in the chat as he speaks, and we're going to set aside 5 minutes afterward to do a little bit of Q&A. So, Dr. Harvey, how are you today?
Loving life. Thank you for having me, Calvin. And welcome everybody joining in live and anybody listening in due time. To answer a question behind the comment around Calvin is like, what is the thesis title? It's really about how do you start, maintain, and sustain the idea of Toyota KATA in an organization. So we had a chance to listen to 12 thought leaders of their own, tell me about how they've been going through that journey. At the time, I was relatively new to it, just a few years in, but thought after 3 years of intense study, I wouldn't touch it again. And I took about 6 months off after graduation to read something else, and then just came right back to it. So I think there's so much more in that that enables a lot of success. And today, that's really going to provide somewhat of a framework for what we're talking through. And these are deliberate behaviors to create a culture of continuous improvement. And as Calvin had alluded to, the title being Leadership KATA. So what can you do? So want to walk through a very familiar framework today, which is continuous improvement and respect for people, with 9 behaviors that we could go execute day in and day out. And some of these I would say I was okay at, some of these I struggled a lot with. So they were in my leader standard work and they became things I needed to practice routinely. And with that, creating a culture of continuous improvement, not just that appearance that is so often visualized in many facilities around the world. So if I start with the most basic question, and I were to ask everyone, who are the world's greatest leaders? There's a high likelihood you'd say some military leader, perhaps some politician, perhaps a monarch, perhaps somebody in the science and technology field. And what this often does is lead us to a conversation about leadership being something you're born with or you're just really special at. So then I started thinking a little bit more about this idea. And then I started to go in this idea of maybe the problem isn't that I'm not executing the playbook well enough. Maybe it's I'm executing the wrong playbook. So I can't go back and be reborn as one of these brilliant leaders. I have to go about my day and work through it. So I've been thinking about reimagining leadership. If you've been following Calvin Williams and any of his work, you'll hear a lot about process orientation. That's really what we're talking about today. So what if we reimagine leadership as a process? And by that process, we'd say, okay, what's working well? What needs improvement in my work? This is really where I want to ground ourselves today, with it being a process and not something that's just special that you need to be born with or you don't have the right traits. So it's how do you go in and deliberately practice the actions you think are going to lead you to success in leadership in any way. While we're focused on continuous improvement today in that culture, it's not necessarily the only place it applies. So I want to start with a brief story when I was in the Marine Corps. I have this wonderful image here because it just brings back so many memories. This is I think the epitome of the Marine Corps. You're out in the middle of nowhere. You've got minimal equipment, but yet you're supposed to do something. And for those that don't know, when you go to Parris Island, South Carolina, every time you'd use the restroom, you'd have to come out and do pull-ups. And pull-ups are one of the 3 things you need to do in the physical fitness test when I was in. I remember jumping up on the pull-up bar, giving it my all, and maybe coming up somewhere between 7 and 10 pull-ups. I dropped down and had a conversation with my drill instructor. I asked him, how many did I need to get 100%? And he said 20. I asked him again, I said, how many do I need to pass the physical fitness test? And he said 3. As you're confused, I'm also confused. So I asked him, I said, sir, can you help me understand that? And he gave me a lesson I'll never forget, which is, if I tell you that the goal is lower than 20, what will you aim for? And that moment, it became a key point for me in my leadership journey. I can't lower the standard for any reason, for any person. But as we talk about a culture of continuous improvement, it can't just be a me thing, but it does provide a huge opportunity for us to explore something common in the conversation, which is this idea of the North Star. So many times when we talk about challenge, and what Toyota offers is the North Star. And what we can say with the North Star is it takes a long-term view. For those that don't know, this long-term view is actually where I think it's 26,000 years that Polaris will be our North Star in the Northern Hemisphere. So if you think about that, between being Polaris and then switching to Vega in about 13,000 years, that's how long-term means for me. So if I'm thinking in 3 or 5 years, it may not be a long enough time frame. But think about it being unreachable, yet directional and inspiring. This is another key point to this. There's at no point which Earth will ever reach Polaris. We just can't do it. And equally important is that it's shared with and embraced by all. And this idea of being shared with and embraced by all is probably best epitomized by the idea of Polaris. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, you can't see it. Somebody's got to tell you it's there. So when we think about leadership and sharing our visions, well, not really half, but at least half of the globe cannot see Polaris from where they're at. So it's critical that we understand this and continue to share this. And my basic argument with visions and challenges is that we just need to talk about it one more time. So whatever it is, it's N+1, one more time, one more time, one more time. And as Calvin talked a little bit earlier, he mentioned that this is the Kaizen speaker series. And no conversation about Leadership Kata wouldn't be appropriate without a conversation on Kaizen. So years ago, somebody had shared this idea with me, and this is my early journey. When we would do improvements, a lot of times it was you go to class and then you were directed by the plant manager to go out and just do stuff, make an improvement somewhere. And what that looked like was a bunch of us, well-intentioned people, doing stuff. We'd say we made an improvement and maybe we measured an improvement, but the challenge was we didn't really know if anything really improved in our business. Were customers getting what they needed? Were we able to invest more capital? Were we retaining talent? Were we developing talent? And then if I think about my career progressing, I got in a position where I could be a supervisor. I say, well, I can connect these lines somewhat and I'll focus on one line. I'll make that really, really awesome. And as my career progressed, I got to the opportunity to say, well, I have an entire facility. Now I can work on Kaizen at a higher level and apply this across the framework of the organization. But really, that was still limited thinking. because of where I needed to go was this idea of the cube Kaizen, which is really where I ground you today. See a rocket ship there. And Calvin mentioned this is in his book, and it's mentioned quite a bit throughout the media that we may all read. When you go back to the space race, JFK took the 50, 60 disparate goals and just said, by the end of the decade, get to the moon. And as Calvin and I were preparing right before we came on, this was a really important conversation for JFK and the space race as a humanity. By giving us a clear focus, we were able to go from here to there because everybody was aligned toward the same goal. So that is something we'll come back a little bit later and just talk about how organizations may not be set up the best way possible to achieve this idea of Kaizen. But this is all about improvements on things, which is where I want to lead you next in the journey. You know, what I got wrong with Kaizen was I was focused on things almost exclusively. I could measure all the performance, improve the performance. But what I didn't understand early in my journey, and I'm starting to understand now, is it's really about people development. And there were a few things that got in the way of me practicing Kaizen the way that I understand it today. One is I was stealing the joy of learning. Calvin didn't mention this at the beginning of the introduction, but I also teach at the University of Cincinnati. And that has been a really awesome 7.5 years of experience where I'm rethinking how do you educate an entire population. It's no different than when I'm looking at the smaller microcosm of my world. But what I was doing was stealing the opportunity to learn. So one of the key behaviors I'd share to go back with is to encourage learning. Make sure this is part of your day and you're not giving answers. And if you're not giving answers, you might think you're good at asking questions. And over the last 20 years, that's really been a lot of interest of mine is how do you ask better questions? That to me is critical in getting people to think, apply scientific thinking, which is at the root of Toyota Kata and really at the root of Kaizen. And for those that haven't read Taiichi Ohno's work, I encourage you to go back. He gave us the secrets back in the 1980s. We ignored them for 40 years and continue to ignore them today. So just go back and really apply scientific thinking to our work and focus your Kaizen on people development, not just process improvement. And the idea of tri-storming comes out of that work. There's a lot of discussion around brainstorming, lots of long lists. But the idea of tri-storming is we have a reasonable idea. We don't know if it'll work. Let's go try it. Last year, I was at a session doing a domino exercise using the Toyota Kata method. And I remember being there as one of the participants, hearing somebody say, this is our plan, only to find out, I was like, this may not actually work the way we want it. So from a tri-storming perspective, I said, you know what? I don't know that it will or won't work. I don't think it will, but let's try it. Turns out I was dead wrong again. So this idea of tri-storming, maintained a relationship with somebody and got us closer to our goal that day. There's another piece that is near and dear from a CI perspective, which is go and see. Somewhere along the way, I heard this and it says, look with your feet. That to me is a brilliant one, but perhaps not as well understood as one thing I see get in so many people's way. They'll have a debate. They'll ruin a relationship or at least hurt it. And instead of talking facts, seeing what happens, right? Really the outcome is, Calvin may be right, I may be wrong. I go learn something. Equally, if I'm wrong, I don't create any offense to Calvin. We go see it together, we learn together, and I understand what Calvin's thinking. So this idea of looking with your feet is critically important because it takes away the judgment, gets you into tri-storming, and really just practicing Kaizen in the field where it's meant to be practiced. So when you get an opportunity, always look with your feet. It solves a lot of time. Equally, I'll say there's an idea around assuming positive intent with their questions. If you feel this way when you're asked the question that those guys are staring at you, this is one of those challenges. And this is how I hear so many questions asked. We assume people aren't doing the things that make sense. And it just doesn't turn out to be true in my leadership experience. Most often, there may be a framework that's missing or misapplied, but there's good intention behind nearly everyone I've ever worked with. But our questions don't reflect that. So another key takeaway here is to assume positive intent in our work. And then one that I just chuckle at every time I see this is an employee of the month parking space. As I walk into the facility, I see their core values hanging on the wall, and one of them is listed as teamwork. And I just sit here in disbelief of how do you have an employee of the month and have teamwork as a goal? Because it's been my experience at every single organization, I've never been able to accomplish anything without the aid of someone else. So when you would recognize one person over another, it seems good on paper, but I really think it offers an opportunity to really improve the way in which we lead. It's always to assign team goals. Going back to the Marine Corps, as we wrap up this presentation, I was never assigned a goal in 13 weeks I could do alone. And whenever we got good enough at it, and we'd figure out what we were trying to learn from a teamwork perspective, our drill instructors and our teachers would raise the goal one more time. They make it harder and harder to make us figure out how to work together. That's not what I see in corporate America for the large part. So think about that. And in the Marine Corps, it was always, we win together, we lose together. There was never a this side won, that side lost. It was always together. And I don't see that same thing in corporate America. So please do consider how you're setting up your team goals, how you recognize and reward people, because I think that's going to be a key to success. And I imagine Calvin will share this at the end with everyone. If not, he has permission to do so. But these are the 9 things that I'm not going to repeat to you, but I would just share with you, I've used in my leader standard work quite continually at some point or another. I'm one of those people that is really happy to achieve a thing, but I move on very quickly, realizing that I wasn't giving enough time for recognition for folks. And I was moving way too fast for people. So then it was one of those things that's like, go recognize somebody for a good deed, go recognize somebody for a good deed. When that became part of a habit, it became something I removed off my leader standard work and started building in something else that I knew I needed to work toward. But I think with this framework of respect for people, continuous improvement, and 9 behaviors, from a leadership perspective, you can get started improving your leadership and practicing toward the goal that you're after. And with that, I have an opportunity to connect here and open up for questions. It's through LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me if we're not already connected there, and invite Calvin and anyone else to ask any questions they might have.
All right, so as I expected, Dr. Harvey, fantastic presentation. Really appreciate it. I think you called out a lot of really important points. I just got a quick question for you. Was that you in the photo, the military picture?
That was not me, no.
That was not
That
you?
was a
Okay.
Creative Commons license photo I found.
All
So
right, fair
able to
enough.
use that one.
Fair enough. I just, hey, good looking guy. I just assume, hey, that must have been you, but no, not the case.
No, I
All right,
wish.
fair enough. So now we got some time set aside for Q&A. If you guys have questions, make sure you drop them in the chat. Also want to mention that we got a really exciting giveaway right after this piece of it. So make sure you stick around for that as well. But while you guys think of questions to ask, I wrote down a couple while you were speaking. So really like your comment, your thought, your mindset around Kaizen being just as much or even more so about people development as it is about actually making process improvements, right? I got a mantra I like to use that says, hey, as leaders, you develop people, they develop the processes, and the processes ultimately serve the customer, right? So think about leadership KATA and how that applies. I think you're playing right in that space of leaders developing people, right? What's the most important thing you've learned about asking better questions?
The most important thing I learned goes back to stealing joy. I realized so often I was technically proficient and knew the answer and I would butt in. So as I learned to stop giving unsolicited advice, it was saving relationships. It was putting the person in the driver's seat and really using the art of humble inquiry out of the Shine Camp, if anyone's not familiar. So just really love that. And it allowed me to be more curious and, I'd say help me become a better listener. So I think that's really the key to asking better questions, is being a much better listener, and it helps you become a better listener the better questions you ask.
That's fantastic. I had an employee who told me one of the wisest things that I had heard before. She said the quickest way to insult a smart person is tell them what to do, right? Right. There's so much truth to that for sure. All right, so we got a couple questions coming in. Let's weave one in here. I just saw a good one just a second ago. So Motaz, I may not be pronouncing that right, asked how Kaizen and KATA are connected. Great question.
Yeah, so this one's actually a very common question. People try to replace what they're doing with KATA, and that is an incorrect assumption. KATA is how you practice Kaizen according to Mike Rother. KATA is really just a how-to guide. It allows the coach to be able to ask specific questions and the improver to do the work through a very specific model, which is a 4-step improvement model.
Yeah, you can think of kata. I think the idea Mike kind of got it from karate, right? Martial arts, where it's a set routine that you practice over and over again until you get a level of mastery. But as you mentioned in your presentation, once you kind of nailed the mastery and nailed a certain behavior pattern, it became second nature. You shifted the kata. You shifted your kata, right? You switched to focus on something else, right? What's going to get you to the next North Star or close to the North Star, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. All right. Doc asks, what is the most challenging aspect of building a healthy culture?
Yeah, so I'm going to take this a specific way, Doc. It may not be the way you intended it, but the way that I think about this is sometimes you can't do stuff through the idea of talking to people. Sometimes it needs to become a policy. So there are certain things that just need to be done from a leadership perspective where you say, this is the direction we're headed. This is where we need you to go. So I think from a healthy culture perspective, there's a lot of value in listening. I'd say at a certain point from an entrepreneurial perspective or a business owner perspective, it's saying, well, here's where we're going. This is the kind of company we want to be. So I think from a healthy culture perspective, you have to name it and sometimes put in policies to support that. And a great example of this in current conversation is around diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can't simply just hope people do it. You have to put something in place to say, let's measure our performance against these really important measures. Otherwise, you may not get to where you're at.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important thing leaders can do is make it to where create an environment where the right thing to do is also the easy thing to do, right? All of us are familiar with being places where we know the right thing to do, but that doing it might get you in trouble, right? You might land in the worst place. So it becomes risky to do the right thing in certain situations. So that's an excellent point. Doc also asked, just to kind of tag onto that, how do you shape or reshape mindsets to elevate buy-in? I think that's the $1,000,000 question, right?
Yeah, it is. And this is something that actually didn't make the presentation, Calvin. I went through a few iterations of this myself before I landed on today's information. And I like the idea of mental models and the way people think, right? So each of us builds the world in a way that makes sense to us. So to me, the value of the leader and asking better questions is to understand how other people think. So there's a very good chance that my thinking is what is causing some of the problems because I just don't quite understand the system as well. And then the idea of saying reshape mindsets. I don't know that I can really do that. What I can do is offer people information and evidence. If they want to take it a certain way that's just not contrary to what most people would see, that's something I don't really know how to change. But I do know going to the place, or going to Gemba, seeing it with each other and just saying, let's experiment, takes away a lot of the banter back and forth. Because I believe at the end of the day, most people want the same outcome, which is really this needs to be successful in some certain way for us.
Yeah, and that is a challenging thing, right? Because you're dealing with motivation at that point, right? And when you're talking movement, I think there's a relationship between the move and motivate, right? I think there's a
Yes.
And if a person's not motivated, they just don't want to move. What do you do, right? As a coach, there's really no work for you, right? Until they want to go, then a coach is needed, right? So, good stuff. So we got a little bit more time for Q&A. If you guys got questions or things you want to put out there, just drop them in the chat. I got one that's sort of up along the lines we were just talking about. How do you influence leaders to look with their feet? What's worked best for you?
I just invite them to the Gemba with me. It's really easy.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
like, I'm not sure what you're
Good.
talking about, Calvin. Can you show me? And very quickly,
All right.
it's just like, I really don't know a lot of times. So people hit me with something. It's like, let's go see it. Or if I see that the team is getting ready to take an action without information based on evidence, then I'll just do a timeout. It's a literal, it's a physical timeout in my hand. Like, because I don't know how we got from A to Z. Help me go back because who saw this? It's like, well, no, I talked to somebody. I was like, no, who saw it? And then make sure it's evidence-based action, not something that we just say, I heard from somebody who heard from somebody, and this is why we have a corrective action. I think that's the root of so many extra activities we build in that just become waste removal for the next Kaizen event.
That's it, right? There's a lot of people who want to make the expeditious decision, like we want to make this without time to go see or all that stuff is kind of getting past that. And then on the other hand, there's people who get offended by the fact that you want more evidence, that you want to see it, right? So it's, those are some of the kind of barriers. But to your point, until the beauty about going to see it, especially in a group, is that you can align a lot better on reality. And without that alignment, you got a lot of times different people having completely different conversations, but trying to get to the same solution, which could be a challenge.
And I think just adding to that, Kevin, also shows a sense of vulnerability and humility. If I'm talking to the leader and say, I don't know what you're sharing, Kevin, can you go show me? I'm open now. I'm admitting I don't know the thing and I'm willing to go learn with you. So I think in that instance, it's creating a lot of, or reducing a lot of barriers that commonly exist when we try to pretend that I know more than you game, that is so common in many organizations.
Yeah, unfortunately. Okay, we got time for one more. If not, we can go ahead and get close to closing it out. We're about on time. So last question, going once, going twice. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap it up. I know folks are probably trying to get back to work in the next couple of minutes here. So I just want to say, Dr. Harvey, William, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you join us today. I really appreciate you carving out time to come through and share your wisdom with us, because I know you're, again, a thought leader and someone who lives this stuff and does a lot more than just talk about it. So appreciate you coming and sharing some key learnings with us. All right, let's give something away. Why don't we? So I want you guys to do something. If you don't have my book yet, first of all, shame on you. But second of all, we're gonna do a quick game. So I use the word continuous improvement a certain number of times in the book. So the person who can guess closest to the right answer, I'll go ahead and write it down. Maria knows what the answer is too, by the way. You can keep me honest. I'll go ahead and write it down here. I'll tell you that the total word count is about 60,000, more or less. So if you'll drop in the chat your guess to how many times the phrase continuous improvement was used in the book, the person who gets the closest wins this lovely Better Everyday cap representing continuous improvement and looking good doing it, right? Spreading the culture, everybody every day, better every day. And we will get your details and send this out to you in the mail. So yeah, put some thought into it. Drop your guess in the chat and we will reward the winner in about 20 seconds here. So, all right, we got 56 from Mike. Damn, Mike, I like continuous improvement a lot. You know, it's one of my favorite things to talk about. Just saying. Ernie said 800. Ernie, I'm flattered. I'm flattered, Ernie. But that is a lot. That's a lot, I will say. Okay, we got a few guesses in. We got 419 from Elaine. We got 560 from Alexander. What's up, Alex? I think we just talked a little while ago. Glad to see you join us today. Jim, what's up, Jim? Jim says 212. Tell you guys, Jim got pretty warm there. You know, just saying. I'm just saying. All right, so I think we're about out of time. If you haven't guessed, you better do so now. We'll give the answer in about 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Turns out the right answer is 256. So who was closer to 250? Like Jim had 212. And I think that's the closest. Am I missing anything? I think that's the one. So Jim, congratulations. You're going to be looking stylish in this new Better Everyday Improver cap to add to your wardrobe. And you know, as you engage with your clients, you know, you can step up your game, you know, looking good. So all right, everybody. So that's it for today. Thank y'all for joining us again. Dr. Harvey, appreciate the presentation, and everyone who joined us today. Thank you guys for making time to come out and spend some time with us. This was a lot of fun. So make sure to check us out next month. We do this every month, and join our mailing list. Check out the Improver University, check out the Improver software, and yeah, really enjoy spending time with you guys. So otherwise, have a great Monday, have a great week, have a great month. Until we see each other again, y'all take care.